Thank you so much. There is a lot to unpack. Maria, I am going to start with you. I'm just wondering, what is your relationship to Buddhism today? Because you were obviously very critical of it growing up, but did intentionally choose to explore it as an adult. So, yeah, I guess aside from, the fascination kind of with the imagery and wanting to, dissect that through your process, what brought you back there and how do you feel about Buddhism today?
Okay, I can only speak on Theravada, on Mahayana and Tibetan Buddhism, because obviously there's multiple branches within Buddhism, right? So I can only speak on those two. I'm not criticizing anything else than those two. I honestly think I personally right now have a relationship that is very much still fragmented and also, I'm going to admit it, still quite ignorant, because I grew up with it culturally, but I didn't go to school to learn about it, my mom tried her best to make me understand the nuances of it, but there's a point where when you're 8, you just kind of blank out. So I have my own personal understanding of it, and I'm not going to pretend that it's representative of the truth of what Buddhism might mean. A lot of it that I've understood from it, for example, this idea of accepting the impermanence, what we call the dukkhas, which apparently is Sanskrit for the different truths behind, living as a human, stuck in a cycle of rebirth and redeath. Understanding those truths, which is essentially the pains that are making us as humans stuck within this reality, that really was incredibly helpful for me. So those truths, right, there's 4 of them, and they're seen as always opposites. So you have the hope, oh my gosh, I should know this. So it's basically the 4 things that are tying us as humans into the world of humans, that is not allowing us to basically escape in order to become bodhisattvas, to finally be away from the worldly difficulties and pains that is basically making us stuck into the earth that we are in today. And those things are stuff like, the fear of loss and the hope for gain, the fear of infamy and the hope for fame. So it's basically all these different things that all of us, in a certain way, we're hoping for and that we're scared of, and every single action of our lives is tied to that. And discovering that during my exhibition research and also talking to my mom really has helped me have more peace within myself into the different fears and insecurities that I was plagued with from a very personal stance. Now, do I still practice it? Do I still pray? Not really. Do I still listen to the prayers for fun? I kind of do, because it's part of my nostalgia. Would I pass it on to my kids? Honestly, I don't know, because in my case it was pretty much forced upon me. But I will admit that being an adult and opening up that circle again and actually having nostalgia tied to it was the only reason that I was still able to go back into it without having too much anger towards it and still finding a bit of peace. I know this is not therapy, I'm really sorry.
Yeah, and kind of touching on your, the organization of your exhibition, your solo show, I think it's refusal, understanding, acceptance, and I'm just wondering if gratitude finds its way into that.
I guess gratitude will come under both understanding and acceptance. Because obviously I do have a lot of gratitude towards the fact that I grew up within that culture. I have gratitude towards the fact that I was very much, I had an amazing education within design, in London when I moved here in university. And there is a lot of things that I am grateful for that is the only reason why I'm able to pull up the show. But it still is, living in parallel with, the idea of forgiveness. In a sense of, in order for you to be grateful for something, right, is you also need to be able to admit that certain things that has happened to you, that could have been painful, there's still some good that came out of it, because not everything is black and white. And in order for you to achieve that state of gratefulness, you need to forgive, to basically accept that whatever pains you've gone through, no matter how small, no matter how big, that you basically accepted that was the reality, and this is what you get today. And in order to get away that positivity, that gratefulness, you need to get to that state of acceptance. But to get that, you need to understand what happened first. So I would say that it is something that you can find loosely in a fine arty way, I guess, into those 2 stages of the exhibition. And I would say that today I'm still grappling with that concept, just on a personal level. And it is through making the art and making the designs and going through those iterative processes that I'm trying to find that idea of gratefulness and forgiveness.
And then the last question I had for you was kind of going back to that temple that you used to practice in Paris, the one that was kind of falling apart or never finished until recently. I guess, what do you think the role of aesthetics and having, you know, kind of a sacred environment to worship in? Like, what is the role of that for you? Yeah.
So, I mean, it's obviously, you know, very evidently huge, right? And especially for that community as well, like in the Vietnamese Buddhist community in Paris. Because the thing is, when you went into that building, right, so everything was concreted. You had poles poking out everywhere. Everything was so desolated. But they would print, I mean, and when I say print, I literally mean like A4 shitty printer paper. Like print so many maximalist designs and mantras, and you would slap it everywhere to cover it up. And you know, and you could tell that is their way to celebrate it. It's something as simple as a printed piece of paper that have a Buddha on it, that has the aesthetic that they want to recreate. Even if they know they haven't been able to achieve it, the thrive towards that was what was so important. And that is something that I definitely relate to today within my process and my practice. And also the reason, you know, like the reason why maximalism, you know, is so huge, is so huge in Vietnamese culture and also in Vietnamese Buddhism, is because within that culture, they believe, you know, that the more you have, the more it shows that you love that thing. The more you have of it, the more it represents, I guess, the physicality of that love towards that sacredness. And that is definitely something that I have within my personal practice, as me as a person. The idea of more is more is something I fully ascribe to. And so, yeah, I always, you know, try to basically create something that's so overwhelming, because that's how it is in my head. Because for me, the more I achieve that overwhelmingness, the more I am in tune with myself. That's how important that aesthetic is to me. I don't want to tone it down. Fuck, am I going to tone it down? I had to tone it down in second year of university. I'm not doing that again. You know, like I'm going crazy and balls to the walls, and I graduated.
Okay, fair. Does anyone have any questions for Maria? Okay, think on it. So Nella, I feel like I don't know where to begin. There is a lot. I think it's interesting, you know, this diaspora, this multiplicity. I guess, how do you find, or how do you sift through the multiplicity and find oneness? Because, you know, identity, I guess it's, I mean, everyone, I guess, identifies in different ways, but, you know, I think, like, wholeness does kind of need some kind of unity. So, like, with the fragmentation, how do you, find the line, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting. Like, I think, you know, there's this sort of, like, I always talk about this, is this working? Oh yeah, it is working. I talk about this quite a lot in my work, this sort of like infinite search for a sense of self. But I think, you know, this sort of oneness and this wholeness that you're speaking of, I find, like, for example, like Lisson or Legacy Russell kind of goes against that, like where they start thinking about this kind of cosmic corporeality of trying to move away, trying to like find this wholeness and try to like fragment yourself in order to just kind of on a more sort of emotive and sensuous way start kind of trying to explore yourself through different ways where you're not striving to sort of one single entity, but rather using different, for example, digital media, if you are a cyber witch or a cyber priestess, to get a sense of what is it that, you know, how do you start defining your identity? What kind of values do I have, and how does it kind of show through, you know, how I present myself, how I kind of describe myself, what is really my identity? So I think, you know, it's a continuous and sort of kind of like a struggle, I think, with identity. I mean, it depends. Everyone has their own journeys, but this sort of, you know, search for this wholeness, like what is wholeness, right? Like how can you sort of, when do we achieve that? I think this is the sort of like existential kind of question that lingers in, you know, the cyber feminist community, but also in any sort of field studying, like, for example, like digital ontopody, and what does it mean to be, and how does the digital help us to think about what does it mean to be in our current age. So yeah, I mean, yeah, it's how do you navigate that? That's a good question. I think you know, you can see different people navigating it through different ways, and I think this is where it becomes interesting. This sort of plethora of like, you know, messiness, this cosmic sort of multiplicity, this kind of movement from like one to like collective consciousness, where it's almost like we are starting to become more and more of like a machine, a networked thing, you know, where it's difficult to even pinpoint where one person begins and where another one starts, especially with like how we use and how we reproduce and share online. So I think that's kind of how I was trying to kind of see this. We're trying to explore myself. I'm starting to also see that there is no oneness. We are kind of all in a weird, strange way connected. And how can we, you know, use that connection to maybe do something, or, you know, resist certain things, or push certain values that maybe have been forgotten. Yeah, this is a very long answer. Sorry about that.
No, it's, I guess it's also interesting because you could see the multiplicity and just the multi-layered nature of these cyber witches, cyber feminists, almost as an effort to conceal and to veil their true identity. So even though it is, you know, them emancipating a part of themselves, it's almost like they're holding on to it, and you, outsider looking in, can never really know, like almost like a protective.
Yeah. It's very interesting because it's like, I think especially with like cyber angels and how they do it, it's like you can get a sort of grasp, but it's what they're showing you, right? So they are producing a fictioning of self. You're never going to really get or grasp that. But I think that is where you start kind of getting like quite interesting also stories, and like why do we start identifying as stars? Like, where's this coming from? Like, why are we like ditching the body all of a sudden? Why are we, some people are completely like, you know, reintroducing the body and actually focusing on the body. Yeah.
There is a lot of emphasis on the body, and that leads into my next question. Yeah, there is a lot of, you know, seductive play, a lot of hypersexuality with the images and you know, the portrayals of these witches, and I guess there's a bit of an ironic quality to it, you know, like the hyper-feminism, but does that, I don't know, I guess some people might find that it detracts a bit from taking, you know, the message behind the image seriously. So I guess how do you override that, or how do you, you know, how can you still be taken seriously knowing that that's a big obstacle that people will kind of stop at?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I love that. I think, you know, trying to like, starting from like, where is it even coming from, and why are so many like spaces, especially the girl, hypersexualizing what the girl is. And I think if I were to, for example, kind of just think about maybe like the witch, for example, and the history of the witch, and the sort of repressed sort of individual, someone that, you know, if they extrude sexuality, they get burned on the stake. And then, you know, this burning of the witches, we have that on social media as well in some way. I think this is like almost like one big middle finger at reclaiming that sort of, you know, language, the bitchness, the sort of the witch, and trying to use that in order to sort of almost like make a stance. I think, you know, it's a good question of like, how do you fight against this, you know, people potentially not taking you seriously. But I think, you know, there's something really interesting in that itself. Why are they not taking you seriously? Is that potentially in some way linked to how culture has made us think about that sort of language, about the hypersexual, about, you know, how historically we have sort of, you know, started to censor things, and we're moving out of the censorship, and how that potentially is what informs this sort of value, or this kind of view that this shouldn't be taken seriously because it's just a woman showing out her hypersexuality. So I think like the use of this language also says quite a lot about the sort of social politics of online space as well, but also like culture and like where are we coming from as a society, and like what has, you know, informed our relationship to women, and how is that changing, you know, how might we still hold on to certain values where we think that certain things should be concealed or certain language shouldn't be used because it's not maybe critical. So yeah, I think the girl itself and like girls operating within the space, extremely interesting individuals. Like I would really like kind of direct that question to them, just because it's also curious, and I guess it's a question for myself as well, like why is that sort of language in this like kind of bimbo, like a bimbo girl, sexy doll aesthetic coming out in those spaces specifically when it comes to those cyber modalities.
Yeah, I mean, there's always been a lot of fear around the female form, so I think that they're kind of flipping the script on that and smacking you in the face with it, and maybe interrogating, like, why does it make you so uncomfortable? Like, why should this deter from all the important things I have to say? So in that regard, you know, I see it, but I also know that some people can, you know, will just stop at, you know, what they see and only take it for face value, and that's, it's interesting to have to navigate that. Does anyone have any questions? I do want to open the floor. Yeah?
Yeah. So I have a question for you both. I can't help but ask with like the current like things going on in the US with like tech CEOs being questioned and stuff like that, because both of your works focus a lot on finding your identity within the technical space, whether it's like through fusion models or through social media and things like that. I was wondering, like, with these big tech companies being the back end of these kind of algorithms and whether that ever like played a part in your work, and does it make you feel like restricted or transformed in a way that you know that there are these kind of big companies that are behind the scenes that might, you know, like how do you maintain your own identity knowing that they're a part, they have to be a part of your journey in a way?
I'll go first quickly. Definitely, 100%. I think, you know, even looking back at one of my works, Control Art to Reflesh, it's this sort of like, I call it a sort of funeral or a speculative ritual where the cyber witch, Cirrus, starts noticing that, you know, by sort of acting and using technology to, you know, hex, do whatever she wants to do, she is tied to these political systems, right? And so these are the sort of like, you know, companies that are allowing us to sort of navigate our identity through these technologies. They're tied to extractivism, they're tied to child labor, they're tied to all of these social, political, and ethical issues that are obviously a very big problem. So like in this ritual, at the end, she decides that the only way to remain is to simply kind of end herself as a being. And so it is a sort of funeral practice for herself where she says, we have been trying to think of alternative modes where we can think through technology that is a little more ethical, but with what we have currently, I do not want to participate in this sort of debate. And maybe, perhaps, the only way to do that is completely to resist that through stopping the use. It's a very sort of gothic and a very, emo sort of piece, I would say. But yeah, definitely.
Excellent answer. Just want to put that out there. I mean, I agree. It's also on my mind. I mean, you guys know this because literally you're my students, but I literally teach ethics of AI. So it's a difficult one. I mean, it's one of those where I'm very much aware that, I mean, obviously the ethics of image data set, the privacy, the surveillance, that every single lecture I give you, I didn't just give the lecture and then forget about it. Those lectures came from also the fact that I was interested in that topic. It's something I've been looking at since 2019. It's something that has been absolutely, that I've been following, and also at the same time feeling a lot of guilt about. And it's a difficult one because I am very aware that I still need some of it in order to produce what I need to produce. The same way, I absolutely hate Adobe. I mean, God, why did they switch from their thingy, like buying it to subscription? I mean, that killed me when that happened. You know, I absolutely hate Adobe with so much passion. And at the same time, I rely on it because I need it so much. And I know it's not as comparable. You cannot compare Adobe with, for example, OpenAI, or like the issue that comes with the data set that Stable Diffusion might be using. There's very different problems here, and definitely very different, you know, solutions. But that specific guilt that comes with being a designer or an artist that has to rely on certain tools, especially if you know you're limited because you don't yet have an alternative, it's one of those where I basically use it in a way that, like I said, is meaningful, that makes sense within the work that I'm trying to produce. And at the same time, if I think to myself, there is an alternative at this very moment, I don't need to use this, I can maybe make my own animation frames, I will do it. I will prioritize that process above utilizing the easy way out in a way. But it's not perfect. My answer is, I don't fucking know. Like, there is a point where these tech giants have taken such a monopoly that they know, you know, that you will need them. And it's about, you know, crossing that threshold is how much do you have of a reliance onto them? Can you limit yourself? And at the same time, you know, everything is going on so quickly that it's so hard to keep up with the new problems and the issues that have been solved. Taking them to heart when you read their papers and they say that they've reduced or mitigated the bias within their data set or their model, it's so much information. So it's about really, you know, thinking twice before you utilize it. It's not a solution, it's essentially a bandage on a broken leg, but the fact that you need way more thinking than making, especially in an age where everyone is making so much in such a hyper-produced way, is giving you a time to really think within your own personal values. Do I really need this? Does this make sense? Should I really be using this for this specific piece of work? Or should I just be going back to my usual process, trying something different, even if it's harder, even if it's more complex, just because at least I know that it aligns with my values, type of thing. But it's not perfect, no one's perfect. I'm not going to, you know, blame anyone if you're not doing this. I mean, who am I to judge and put the first stone? So yeah, it's a hard one.
I think there was like a question in here. Did I see a hand? Okay, yeah.
I have a question for Nella, because I guess from you talking about the cyber witch practice, it feels like you're kind of advocating for it in a way, or like you're trying to get people to engage with it. And just from my personal experience, like I have been socialized as a woman for the majority of my life. You know, I identify as non-binary, but I simultaneously also very much identify with the concept of the girl. So how do you feel like a cyber witch practice could potentially help like physically, I guess, underrepresented bodies within this like framework of the spectral body, which kind of detaches it from actual physical body?
I mean, the way I see the cyber witch, I'm completely aware that, for example, you know, the nymph, the witch, the girl, they're all sort of like terms used to describe sort of femme or female bodies. And I kind of advocate trying to kind of strip away from that, because if you also look into the spaces and the people operating as these individuals, a lot of them do not actually see themselves as a single sort of entity on that spectrum. So you know, I would rather focus on the function of what the body, what each sort of either cyber angel, cyber witch, the function that they you know, entice or that they're trying to sort of promote, rather than the sort of gender construct. I mean, I think it's easier to say and harder to practice, because when you are maybe saying I am a cyber witch, you're thought of as maybe female. But I think this is where we have to fight for this, as not just, you know, a place for eco priestesses, but, you know, priestesses in whatever form. So I think that's what I am trying also to advocate, to kind of try to think away from the gendered body. The girl is not a gendered body, it's a state that has been also used to kind of maybe talk about aesthetics that have been tied to younger women. But I would definitely, if you're interested, like if you want to like, you know, hex, heal, like just go for it. Like I think the community, it's interesting because it can be quite isolating. Like I think, you know, the witch does kind of operate like in a sort of reclusive space. But I think through this work and through trying to kind of build this project, I'm starting to think that perhaps it is worth to kind of, you know, start thinking about, you know, coming together, you know, covens, not necessarily in the sense of let's talk about, you know, all the rituals and hex, like Elon Musk, but also like, you know, educating ourselves on all the reading material, like just talking and like really hearing like from different bodies how they perceive themselves online. I think that's our kind of duty, and that's what I think I would like the practice to become. Yeah.
I think it's also interesting because I remember doing some research on Second Life in particular, and you know, a lot of these female forms are actually, you know, there's a heterosexual male that's hidden behind them, and they identify as such, but for whatever reason are choosing to embody these female characters.
Yes.
So, and they don't necessarily even have a reason for it, other than for whatever reason they feel like they embody this person. So I mean, I think that already, you know, raises some questions. You know, well, it could go a lot of directions, but yeah, I guess it's a state of mind more than it is this girl figure. It's you know, an emancipation. It's a call for, I guess, a revisiting of all cultural norms. Yeah.
But also, I think, you know, with the girl, just really quickly, there's something sort of ecstatic about the girl, almost like I think it can be emancipatory for even heterosexual males, and like in the sense of like stepping into a world where you're like just kind of being ecstatic and you being you know, like cute and lovable, and like being able to spread love without sort of society like looking and trying to tell you what, you know, perhaps a man or a male body should act like. So I think that's why, I mean, I've been seeing that quite a lot, like, as well. I find it really intriguing. That's why I love speaking to, like, all different, you know, individuals and what kind of personalities and bodies they step in and out in the cyber realm. But yeah, I think everyone has sort of scope and realm to step into whatever body they want in the cyberspace. And I think that's what I would like to advocate. Like, strip away the sort of, you know, cultural attachment to it. See just like as an other, and just step into it as just like an other being, and see how it makes you feel. Like, how does it change your experience? Like, yeah.
Good question.
Actually, I have two questions for Nella, and it's involved in this discussion of the girl, of archetypes that we've been talking about. I wonder if is there something specific on the digital space, on digital reality, that makes it also talk about performance and subsequent embodiment of mostly STEM archetypes? Let's say, I understand that some archetypes transcend gender and binary, but why is there language in the first place? Let's say, how come we don't have cyber Vikings, cyber ninjas, cyber knights?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Like, we can see this beautiful cyber knight. I mean, sure, they're tied again a little bit to the femme body, but they do, when I did speak to them, they said that they're a genderless post-human visual experiment. So this is a sort of cyber knight in some sense. But I think, yeah, I mean, I wonder, I think through my exploration, I haven't seen that many, or it could be that, you know, there's just such a massive like plethora of so many bodies. It's at this point I'm like trying to sit down and start like archiving it, because also I think there's no point of sort of putting labels on things. You know, with the introduction of the cyber witch, the sort of cyber angel and like nymph, I'm not trying to tell people that there's categories in any way, but I've seen sort of recurring terms, and they do blend into one another. I would say a cyber witch is always in some way a cyber nymph because of the forest and the moss, and because of how they behave. But I do think, that there is a sort of there's so many of these femme-type sort of cyber bodies, and it's a good question of where are the maybe more patriarchal male bodies going to. I mean, to be fair, I don't know. I think a lot of gamers would have a lot to say in that. I wonder if anyone in the audience could let us know. And so you had another question as well.
Yes, it's about the emancipatory power that embodies identities grants us. I want to push that a little bit.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Please do.
Digital grants emancipation, but in becoming or embodying a certain type of identity, we box ourselves into yet another trust identity, and one that is rewarded by the algorithm. For example, the Go, which is basically an incentivized that feeling of individuality that simultaneously allows a certain freedom of expression, like you said, and a genderless expression as well. So my question is, to what extent are cyber identities emancipatory?
That's a very good question. I think, with the word emancipatory, it's also very sticky territory, because it's emancipatory in what way and to what extent. I think, everyone can sort of define it in a different way. The way I've been kind of seeing it is that stepping into these identities have allowed a lot of these creatives, and even non-creatives, some of them do not say that they're artists, and they do precisely say, please don't call me an artist. They allow these beings to kind of play and sort of, I guess, learn a little bit about themselves in some way. And I feel like having a sort of moment to kind of pause and perhaps sit with what you've got, the body and the mind, and the sort of values attached to that mind, and to really ponder what is it that I really care about. I think forcing that sort of break from this fast-paced life, let's not pretend that we're all leading, right? Allows us to be emancipatory in even a small, minuscule way. I think when we talk about emancipation, we can talk about, you've got the bind Trump movement, even hexing Trump on Facebook, which is very interesting. You've got hashtag resistance magic. That's a different sort of form of, I guess, looking to, gather together online and to resist certain powers. But then again, what is the kind of extent of that action? And I think that is where we have to start being, critical of the practice. I mean, as also Sabina said, you can say I'm an advocate of this sort of practice, but also I think we do need to be very critical of it. And I love your question. I love being critical of it, because this is where we start thinking about, what do we get from this? Of course, this is an artifice of sort of play, collective consciousness, but at the same time, maybe bringing forth these sort of ideas, these beliefs and practices and these values gives us maybe a sort of, a window into what we could be doing. How could we spread these things? I think, even with the movement of girl mossing online, even getting these influx of TikToks being girl, you gotta moss. In some way, it can be quite, emancipatory. It's nice to hear that girl mossing is such a big part of so many people's lives. I'm a very big advocate of girl mossing. I think everyone should girl moss at least once a week. I think that's a very sort of mixed answer. But thank you so much for the question. Very nice. Also, lovely thoughts and really well written. Well done.
She's our resident philosopher.
That's why.
Does anyone else have any questions? So, I guess I want to ask both of you, do you feel like this is an exclusive domain for, I guess, the digital native, you know, in terms of coming to a fuller sense of identity? I mean, would you ever recommend to, I don't know, your parents' generation, you know, go look in the leakages and in the cracks of the interweb, like go find yourself? Like, is that exclusive to a certain age?
That's a bad
I mean, I wouldn't want it to be. I think, you know, it is different when you grow up with the internet. I think, like, being, like, waking up every day and, like, first thing that you do is, like, hop on, like, the computer and start, you know, playing Sims or whatever it is that you played. It is, like, I think a different relationship, but I wouldn't want it to be age restricted in any way. I mean, I can see even with my parents or even with my grandmother, she's 81 years old. The way she uses emojis is just so beautiful. And
Parents are very expressive
yeah,
of the emojis, I agree with that.
I think, but like she does it in such a like creative sort of critical practice. And the best thing is she can't see really well. Like she is losing sight, but she is using emojis as a way to help her communicate certain messages where she doesn't have to type them out for too long. So it is in some way helping her to kind of spread these messages, which is really nice. I mean, I've always said she is, you know, like 2 generations back, the OG cyber witch of my family lineage. But you know, even looking at like parents and like sort of waves of like, I wouldn't call it girl blogging, but like blogging all of a sudden, like, and sending all photos of like on WhatsApp. I don't know if that's just my experience, but like also the selfie, the parent selfie, like there's really something there. And I think, you know, in some way you can see the sort of excitement and the light in their eyes as a way to kind of maybe explore something that this sort of easiness and maybe happiness of things that maybe was harder to express without the digital realm. I think sharing is such a big sort of, you know, part of the online space, and being able to share your happiness with your family at a sort of click of a button, like truly is, I think, very kind of emancipatory thing even for people that are not a digital native in the slightest. So yeah, I do not think it is age restricted, but I do think it's a very different experience. I think we can learn a lot from people that are not digital natives as well. Yeah, I don't know. How about you? Do your parents send you interesting WhatsApp messages?
Yeah, they don't really use WhatsApp because they're extremely paranoid about big tech, but they do send it to me on Telegram. That's a really good point. I mean, it's like, you know, obviously as a goal, like, it would be absolutely lovely to have so many different generations to basically be a part, like, use the tools, be a part of this world, the conversation, feel that catharsis as you described, you know, like the emancipation, the catharsis. But yeah, it really would be dependent on the experience, dependent on their own personal experience of life. Because obviously, you know, you have like a certain reticence from, for example, my parents' generation, or even a generation like, you know, in between, where you have this aspect of the fast-paced aspect of the production that is very much taken with a lot of almost anger. Like in a sense of it's like, you know, things are much faster for you younger generations. You have all these tools, you have the internet to the tip of your fingers, you have all these things that you're talking about, that you're creating that is so quick, you're not thinking. And you're not thinking because of the tools. And so I can feel a certain reticence from, you know, past, like older generations to me, where they feel that these tools can be seen as almost a plague, can be used well, but unfortunately are almost a plague in the younger generations today, like Gen Z, Alpha, whatever. And that therefore, from their perspective, it's not something that they're really willing to try out, simply, again, this is my own personal experience, I'm not talking about anyone else, I'm not generalizing everyone, I'm talking about my personal experience. But yeah, my personal experience, because simply from their perspective, it's like, you are missing out on something so genuine, so authentic, so analog, something that allows you to think, to take steps to be patient, and now, you know, you're falling into that trap of impatience, and that is due because of these things. So I know my dad very much speaks like that. You know, he tells me, you become impatient, you know, you are an impatient young girl. You know, it's because of all these things you're using. And he will be amazed at what you can produce when I show him the animation or Stable Diffusion or whatnot, or like how quick an idea can be outputted. But ultimately he still thinks, you know, you are not taking your time, and this is something that you and the next generation and all of them will feel. And it's not something you can come back from. Very moody, you know, very angry, and very like you're dooming yourself for life. So for me, it's a very difficult one. It's that if you're seeing the negative experience and you don't have the hands-on one of using these tools or be a part of this world, it's extremely hard for you to contextualize it, because you won't necessarily have the logic to contextualize it, because you don't have that hands-on experience. I want them to. It would be great. It's a hard challenge. It's a hard battle that I haven't been able to win yet.
Yeah, I think we're all working on that one. I think we're out of time, but I want to thank you both, Maria and Nella, for coming in today. And, you know, this was a really interesting talk. I hope that you all enjoyed it. Thank you for coming here this Saturday afternoon. We have another talk and panel next Thursday the 8th with Marissa Beatty and Wesley Goatley, Future Worlds and AI. So if you're interested, I think that one will be at 6 p.m. And yeah, thank you guys so much. Have a good night.